We've had a number of questions that individuals from the floor have asked to put their questions to the panel. So can I ask John Sheridan to stand up and offer your question, please?
John, the mic. We didn't quite manage to achieve the first annual target of emission reduction. What more do you think needs to be done? And, for example, does or indeed should the second report on proposals and policies contain performance indicators to help keep us on track?
Okay, thank you, John. So, for all the good talk, we actually missed our first target last year. Does that mean we talk the talk but can't walk the walk? Ian?
What we set out was a hill in front of us from when the Act was passed to 2020. Fairly steep sloping hill, and we set ourselves a plan of walking up that hill. What happened last year was we went down first. If we carry on going down, we will face a cliff at some point between now and 2020. And that cliff will involve disruptive change, some of which is good and we may need to have the crisis, some of which could be destructive and quite painful. So the challenge is to get us walking back up the hill. And I think that does require some hard performance measurable targets in areas. I would agree, I think the most challenging area is transport and how we sort that out and what measures we take there. The second biggest area, I think, is the built environment, which then leads to energy use and what the measurable progress on the quality of Scottish built environment, offices, shops, pubs, churches, houses. So I think we need hard, measurable targets there. Otherwise, we will face a cliff, and it's that way. So it's not the lemming falling off the cliff. It's you're facing an impossible climb. So we do have to get more measurable targets, and we will fail to meet them in the first year or two. And that is a difficult challenge for politicians of all parties to set targets and know that we might not quite get there, but it creates a momentum that in year 3, 4, 5, you start overachieving.
Thank you. Second question was from Nigel Holmes.
Yes, really pleased to hear Joe talk about the challenge of energy efficiency and also to mention Bloom Energy as one of the companies with the fuel cell focus. But coming back to the question, how does Scotland rebalance the focus away from renewable energy, where we've had great success, towards energy efficiency, but also low carbon heat, and most importantly, from the 2020 group perspective, towards low carbon transport? Do we need carrots, sticks, or local heroes?
Okay, so thank you, Nigel. So we've been demonstrably successful with renewable electricity. How do we reshape that around heat, transport, energy efficiency? John, and then I'll ask Charles to make a couple of comments.
Could I just go back to the point that the first question there from, I think, John, on the question of targets, I don't think there's any need for any more targets. I think the targets are pretty bleeding obvious, and we didn't succeed in them in year one. And I think we've got that as a consequence of something ministers are taking very seriously and are exploring at this moment. And we have to take the steps to ensure that we get onto the right pattern of achievement. In our defence, I would say there were particular extenuating circumstances, but it's not much of a defence, so I'll not waste much time talking about that. I think on the question of the second question, I think involves ensuring that we've got a balanced programme of activity and recognising that we won't actually achieve all of the range, whether it's about improving energy efficiency products and programmes, whether it's about changing transportation patterns. I think on transportation patterns, it's much more carrots than sticks. I think you have to put in place credible public transport alternatives to make a difference for people in terms of their transportation choices. And that's why we're investing as heavily as we are in public transport schemes. I think on the other elements of the programme, we just have to have a credible set of actions in place right across the board that people can support in the different walks of life. It's interesting, Charles' observations about the attitude of Fourth Ports on their choices during the recession. I'm quite struck by the number of businesses that I encounter who have taken forward, who recognise energy use and energy commitments to be a very significant factor now in their profitability and their performance, and they are prepared to invest for the long term. And I think there's an encouraging trend that we'll see the benefit of in the years to come.
Charles, do you want to add anything?
I mean, one of the interesting things in the transportation front we see is that if you look at goods being moved worldwide, somewhere around about 90% plus of goods moved by sea worldwide. The percentage in Scotland is down as low as 70%, and that's because a lot of our goods move up by road from England. And in some cases, the products we're exporting require containers of fresh air to be roaded up from the south of England. Coastal shipping has a third of the emissions of road haulage. We subsidise coastal shipping. We can make quite a dent in that transportation target. That to me is actually one of the low-hanging fruit that we haven't taken up yet.
Joe.
There's speaking of area academics who are very interesting, there's a guy at Oxford named Detlef Helm who's written a book about using essentially carbon taxes directly seen by customers to change behavior. And I think everything I've looked at so far says the most rapid way to change behavior is the way Adam Smith suggested, to show people the price of their decisions. And so a thing I think that can be done that raises revenue, that ties directly, is to put carbon prices explicitly into products and services in your economy. I think it's remarkably efficient in terms of giving 1,000 entrepreneurs and 1 billion people insight into the costs and their decisions. To your point, another thing that's kind of interesting, people now know that California is the same kind of GDP as Italy, and people kind of know that around the world. Another thing that people don't know, though, is the 7th largest polluter in the world is international shipping. It comes out of the stack in number 2 fuel oil. And yet it's largely unregulated. So there are all sorts of things that you should insist on at your borders. Clean bunkerage, compliance with standards, carbon tariffs, direct prices that can be remarkably effective at rapidly changing behavior. The lesson in shale gas in the United States is not government policy, it's the power of markets. And the guy who demonstrated the power of markets was your Adam Smith.
Thank you, Joe. Third question from the floor. Louise MacDonald.
Thank you. And just as an appropriate memory for this particular venue and in relating to your input, Joseph, is that people in Scotland will know Dr. Harry Burns, who is our Chief Medical Officer in Scotland, has a very famous quote about health statistics, and he says, "In God we trust, all others must bring data." And I think that's what you've done for us this evening. I'm a member of the 2020 group, but also work with young people, so it was a pleasure to hear the kind of comments about young people this evening. We've talked about technology and so on in the policy and legislation, but behaviour change, I suppose, is where I'm quite interested. Young Scot has carried out some research for the 2020 group with young people themselves, and they were teenagers, slightly older teenagers. The overwhelming view from them was, this has been an issue our whole lives. You've told us this is a problem our entire time, from when we were at primary school to secondary school, and it's still not sorted. It's getting worse. there was a huge sense of frustration from those young people. So I suppose I'd be interested in the panel's thoughts on where young people in Scotland, and I suppose beyond education, because I think they are, experiencing that well through our Eco Schools programme, but as activists for change, where would you see young people's role?
Thank you, Louise. Wendy, would you pick that up?
Yeah, I think the best revolutionaries for us are primary school teachers. As some of you will know, I have twins who are now 6, and since 5, my daughter has sat on the Eco Committee, and the Eco Committee is much more important than the school's council on which her twin brother, age 6, also sits. And I mean, the Eco Committee drives what happens at the primary school, and from literally age 5, they're coming home saying, where's the compost bin and all that. And some of it's soft stuff, but fundamentally, we have created in Scotland's primary schools a generation of teachers who are making an extraordinary impact on that being the measure for all primary children as to whether they are a decent citizen in a way that didn't exist 5 years ago, and we should be incredibly proud of whoever thought of it or made it happen, because it's extraordinarily powerful going forward. I hope they don't all turn up and vote green when they grow up, but they see the world as caring about the environment being the metric of whether you're a moral person, and that's got to be a good thing.
Okay, thank you. And the final question from the floor.
I would just say we have to encourage them to shout louder. Give them every opportunity to make sure the grumpy old men and women who've got the ability to sit on a platform continue to get it. One of the things I say about the 2020 group is it's about, it's preaching to the choir in one sense, and so thank you in a sense, you are the choir. Actually, our role is to get the choir bigger and more committed, and young people can have a key role in that. How many businessmen and women attitudes will be changed by what their children tell them they should be doing? And so we have to make sure that children, young people and people into their 20s have a real voice to force people like me to act.
Thank you. Final question from the floor from Eric McGeechan.
Thank you. Given the level of Climate 2020 ambition, there's clearly recognition that we have to address gaps in decarbonising skills. Now, engineers can't do this alone. There also needs to be strong and coordinated support from academia and also from business change managers and others who will influence behaviour change. So my question to the panel is, what more do the panel believe should be done now to ensure a sufficiently coordinated approach in addressing that skills gap, climate skills gap, across the different professions and within them as well?
Joe, can you pick this one up?
Yeah, I think, again, the thing that forces change is, and again, I hate to pound an old record, is not rules, but prices. If you put into the marketplace prices, then people self-organize and the invisible hand goes to work. So I think, and government plays by the way, Adam Smith, when he said free markets, has in it two assumptions that are key that he talks about in Wealth of Nations. One is that we all bear the cost of our own consumption. In other words, that if it's polluting, you pay for it. You don't dump it on the other guy for free. And the second is that, in fact, talent is attracted to opportunity. So if through tax policies, through reduction and unneeded regulation, through education and public support, you help shine the light on the opportunity, the world is amazingly self-organizing as opposed to being centrally organized. So I like markets, but I'm that kind of a guy. Okay, thank you. I'm aware that we're running out of time very rapidly, so before I ask John Swinney to come up and give some closing remarks, I just wonder if each of you, with one line only, can just offer your thoughts on what is the key thing that you think will make the most difference over the next 1 year towards Scotland meeting its 2020 targets. Charles, let's start with you.
I think a level of leadership and confidence from government, and I say this in the sense of the UK government, in terms of a framework for electricity market reform.
Okay, thank you. Wendy.
I think the same thing. Absolute certainty within this year about the rewards for low carbon generation. Number one.
Okay, Ian.
I'm going to answer a different question. And I want to pick just something that Joe said about the billion people. The biggest people in Africa, more people have killed, die in Africa from kerosene lamp pollution and fires than from malaria. And the ability to take distributed solar into that billion people, improve the quality of life and reduce carbon emissions. The payback from a solar lamp to a kerosene lamp is weeks. And none of your investments pay back in weeks, do they, Charles? None of mine do. That's one of the biggest things that Scotland could do to make a real impact on the world, because Africa is at the heart. One of our heroes, Livingstone. Scots are well received in Africa. We could make a real difference in that area. And that wasn't what you were expecting, was it?
It wasn't, no. But it's good all the same. Joe?
I'm not, again, the guys I like here are Adam Smith, and the other guy I like is James Watt. And James Watt invented steam engines, and steam engines can use anything to power them, including nuclear. I would urge you to put your foot back into that race. Scots, for 1,000 years, have been the engineer that built clever things and shipped it around the world. So take advantage of what you've learned off Aberdeen, take advantage of what you've learned in shipping, take advantage of what you know about engines and those things, and build things that can be used around the world, around the clock, for everyone.